Hello, welcome back, microeconomists. So today we're going to be focusing on monopoly. So last week we talked about perfect competition, and today we're going to talk about monopoly. This is looking at the opposite side of the spectrum. So the most important concept in this chapter is the relationship between marginal revenue and price as a monopolist. So the key thing with a monopolist, there's only one producer in this overall industry or this market. So this gives them a lot more profit, and we'll see why specifically graphically. So some of the questions that we want to look to answer is, why do monopolies arise? Is it good or bad? Why is marginal revenue less than price for a monopolist? How do monopolies choose their price and quantity? How do monopolies affect society's well-being? So is it beneficial to have a monopoly? When is it good? When is it bad? What can government do about monopolies? So are there rules and regulations that we can impose to prevent this? And then lastly, what is price discrimination? So price discrimination we'll talk about. This is something that you've seen in your everyday life. And we'll talk more about that later on in this presentation. So introduction, a monopoly is basically a firm that is a sole seller of a product without close substitutes. So that's one of the key or one of the first distinctions. There's no close substitute to this specific product. Another one, it has market power. Basically, it can influence the market price of a product that it sells. So if we compare it to a competitive firm has no market power. They take the price that is set. Here, with a monopoly, you can set the price well above and people will still purchase your product. Again, you're the only provider of this product, nobody else. In perfectly competitive firms, when we're talking about, let's say, Big Lots, Target, and Trader Joe's, they all sell bananas. There's no difference between those products. Here, you can differentiate your product, and you could be the only sole producer of this product. Also, another key thing is they arise because barriers to entry. That's a big thing. So anytime you see barriers to entry or BTE, that stands for barriers to entry. This is basically preventing other firms to enter or exit the market. And basically, when you have barriers to entry, you're reducing competition. If you reduce competition, you'll gain monopoly status. So an example of barriers to entry would be, let's just say, not everyone can just become a lawyer overnight. You need to be able to get into law school, pass the bar exam, and so forth. So these are essentially rules and regulations to prevent people from entering these markets. Again, if you value it enough, you're going to go out and do it. Another example would be if all of us just wanted to start up our own airline industry today, we couldn't, because you would need to meet rules and regulations. You need a lot of upfront costs. There is being able to get capital, being able to purchase planes, routes, so forth. So again, there's a lot of barriers to entry in this case. It could be cost, it could be rules and regulations, it could be licenses, whatever it may be. It's harder to enter this market. Compared to a perfectly competitive firm, there are no barriers to entry. Basically, anyone can set up shop and sell this product. So barriers to entry. The first barrier to entry is monopoly resources. So if a single firm owns a key resource. Now, an example of this would be De Beers. They are a diamond producing company. They're located in South Africa, and at one point in time, they owned 95% of the world's diamond mines. And in this case, they have a stronghold on a key resource. Yes, you need diamonds to produce other jewelry, or other companies produce jewelry with diamonds, so they get to influence the price. If you own 95% of the market at one point in time, you can charge a much higher price. So if you own a key resource, you can have a monopoly. So if you own something that nobody else has access to, this is good. This is another way to make a huge profit in the long run. Another one is government regulation. So sometimes the government does help create monopolies. Now, an example of this would be patents and copyright laws. So basically, the government gives a single firm the exclusive right to produce the good. Now, there's other ways that this happens as well. So we'll talk about patents and copyrights soon. Basically, these are protecting profits for a single producer. So, for example, if you have a patent, basically no one else can produce this product for X amount of time. And now, during this time period, you get to charge whatever price, and you're going to be able to capture this profit. So again, this is a monopoly for a short amount of time. But after this patent is over, it enters common public domain. And with this, everyone has fair game over profits. Another one is the production process. So When monopolies are good is when you have a natural monopoly. Basically, a single firm can produce the entire market quantity at a lower cost than several firms. So an example of this would be, let's just say you have a railway system in your city. Now, with a railway system, what comes with a railway system? You need to be able to pay for the tracks, have routes set up, and so forth. So do you think it's much more efficient to have two railway systems or one railway system? The answer is always going to be one, because the costs are going to be much lower just for one. If you were to set up a second one, you would have to have new routes, new tracks, and you only have a scarce amount of space. The example we're going to go over is an electrical company. So let's just say 1,000 homes need security. So here we have our average total cost for a firm that produces electricity. So if we have 1,000 firms in this case, so in this case we have 1,000 firms at this point, or if we, I'm sorry, not 1,000 firms. If we have one firm and they can produce a quantity for 1,000 firms, the price is going to be $50. Now, if we had two firms and they split the difference, if each produced for 500 households each, the cost is going to be $80. So overall, it's much more efficient if you have a natural monopoly in this case. So for example, most utility companies are natural monopolies. The government gives them access to this monopoly status because it's much easier to have one electrical company because they only have one electrical grid that they need to set up compared to having two in the same exact city. So in here, average total cost for if one firm services all 1,000 homes is less than if two firms service 500 homes. So in this case, it's much more beneficial just to have one. All right, so monopoly versus competition, their demand curves. So in a competitive market, we have a horizontal demand curve. This is one of the key distinctions of a perfectly competitive market. They have no influence on the market. They only want to purchase at this specific price. Now, a monopolist demand curve is downward sloping. Because there's only one seller, it faces a market demand curve, and to sell a larger quantity, the firm must reduce price. So in this case, marginal revenue does not equal price. In our perfectly competitive market, our marginal revenue does equal price. So key distinction here, marginal revenue equals price. Here, marginal revenue does not equal price. Here, we can charge a different price and individuals will consume accordingly. So at a higher price, less consumption, lower price, more consumption. Okay, so here we're going to look at monopolies revenues. So Common Grounds is the only seller of cappuccinos in town. The table shows their market demand for cappuccinos. So I want you to fill in the missing table. So total revenue when the quantity is 0 and price is $4.50, it's going to be 0. So again, you can pause the video, fill it out. Here, as price increases, you see total revenue increases as well. And it gets to a point where then it starts to decrease. So it peaks at 10 and then it drops after. Now our average revenue is just our total revenue divided by our quantity. And our marginal revenue is the difference between revenue 2 and revenue 1. So in this case, price is equal to average revenue. Sorry, same as competitive firm, but marginal revenue is less than price, whereas price would be equal to marginal revenue in a competitive firm. So our marginal revenue here, so this last column, is less than our actual price. This is why we set a higher price. So the next graph, it's going to show us when we graph all these points. Okay, so our demand curve, it's going to be these first two columns graphed. So this is our demand curve. Next, we're going to graph our marginal revenue curve. Our marginal revenue curve will always be below our demand curve. So just make sure you know that. And this is a key distinction. When we look at marginal revenue, and when we still look at monopolies, we're still going to look at marginal revenue where it equals marginal cost. That's always going to be the profit maximizing condition, no matter what structure that you look at. So in this case, when we draw in our marginal cost curve, it's going to intersect the marginal revenue curve. That's where they maximize, or that's where they're going to maximize their profits. Now, you're not going to essentially produce at that specific point. It'll be a price corresponding to their demand curve. So for example, let's just say, okay, I'm going to get fancy. Let me change the color. Let's say black. Okay, let's say our average cost curve, or our marginal cost curve, comes in like this. So this is our marginal cost. So our profit maximizing condition is right here. That's not changing. MR equals MC, that's where you maximize your profit. That's not the price that you're going to set. Your price will not be $2. Because you're the only provider of this product, you're able to set a price that's corresponding to this demand. So at this is going to be the price that you actually set. So let's just say it's $3.10. So to maximize your profit, where MR equals MC, but it's going to be corresponding to that demand that individuals are willing to pay for this product. So from there, we'll do calculations later on, but for now, it's still MR equals MC. Okay, so increasing quantity has two effects on the revenue. So if we produce more and more, the output effect is higher output raises revenue. The price effect, a lower price reduces revenue. So if we go back to our example here, if we want to produce more and more, so if we're producing, let's just say 7 units, the price is going to be much lower. Now, if we want to produce, now you can do the math as well. So if we're producing, let me get my pen. If we're producing 7 units at $1, our total revenue in this case is going to be 7. If we produce 5 units at $2, our total revenue is 10. So the lower the quantity and the higher the price, the more the total revenue, to an extent. So that's why we look at MR equals MC. So as output increases, our total revenue is going to decrease. As output decreases, our total revenue is going to increase. So this is why monopolies can make much more profit, is because they restrict their output. That's a key thing you need to know. They restrict their output. So marginal revenue is less in price. To sell a quantity, or to sell a larger quantity, the monopolist must sell at a lower price. So it's negative if price effect is greater than the output effect. So the main thing, so in our example, when common ground increases from 5 to 6, so if we go back, so from 5 to 6, you don't want it. You always want to have a positive effect. You want to be able to capture the most amount of profit. So this will make more sense when we go over our practice problem. So like a competitive firm, the monopolist is always trying to maximize their profit, where MR equals MC. So they want to set the highest price consumers are willing to pay for that quantity. Again, remember, they're the only provider of this product. So the first thing you do, step 1, find where MR equals MC. Now with our two curves, we have two specific curves. We have our demand, and then we have our marginal revenue. You're still going to be given a marginal cost curve, still average total cost. You still have all those stuff. But the first thing, always find where MR equals MC. Second, you find the price from the demand curve above. So we'll go over an example. Okay, so we're going to look at profit maximization. Here we have our marginal cost. Marginal revenue is downward sloping, demand downward sloping. So the profit maximizing point is where MR equals MC. This is how much we should produce. This quantity right here should be how much we produce. So the profit maximizing quantity is at Q, where they intersect. Now you find the price by going straight above. Basically, at this quantity, how much are people willing and able to pay? So it's going to be corresponding to this point on our demand curve. This is the price we're going to set. So just based off this right now, you should be able to calculate your total revenue. So your total revenue is this. This rectangle is total revenue, price times quantity. Now, if I throw in our average total cost curve, now we want to find out what the cost is for calculating, or the cost of producing this many units. And to do that, it's where our quantity, or this dashed line, basically this, where this intersects our average total cost curve, this is going to show us basically what our total cost is. So whatever this price is, this is going to be corresponding to our total cost. So give me 1 second. This red is our total cost. Remember, it's very similar to our perfectly competitive firm, where it intersects our average total cost curve, and this outer rectangle, this is horrible. The green is our total revenue. Okay. So as a competitive firm, the monopolist profit equals this just top rectangle. So this top rectangle is your profits, or you can do the total revenue, total cost, whatever is easier for you. So you will always be given this. Okay, so a monopoly does not have a supply curve. So if a competitive firm takes the price that is given, they have a supply curve that shows how its quantity depends on price. A monopoly firm is a price maker. Their quantity does not depend on the price. So their quantity and price are jointly determined by marginal revenue and marginal cost and the demand curve. So no supply curve for a monopoly. They get to choose the price that is set. Again, that's giving them more power and clout in this market. Okay, so monopoly versus generic drugs. Let's say there's patents on a new drug. This gives a temporary monopoly to the seller. So patents in the pharmaceutical industry, this gives them incentive to produce new drugs. So if we provide these firms with the patents, the incentive is to capture more profit. If they get these patents, no one else can produce this product for 10 to 15 years. And because of that, their profits have increased. They can sell at a higher price. Now, when we look at, so here we're going to compare perfectly competitive and a monopoly. So here are, so let's just say our marginal cost is here. This is where marginal cost and marginal revenue intersect. This PM, this is the price that the monopoly is going to charge. This is the quantity that they're going to produce. So this is their profit. So if you think about this top square, or we don't have our average total cost curve, but this is the price and quantity. Now, when this patent expires, anytime a patent expires, it enters public domain, meaning anyone else can produce this product after this patent expires. So this is where you get generic drugs. So when generic drugs are produced, you're going to produce at this point right here. Now this marginal cost, this is your price the perfectly competitive firm charges, and this is the quantity that the perfectly competitive firm produces. So a key distinction between monopoly price and perfectly competitive price, and monopoly quantity and perfectly competitive quantity. Price for a monopoly will always be higher. So here, let's see if I can. So price of a monopoly is always going to be greater than the price of a perfectly competitive. Quantity of a monopoly is always going to be less than the quantity of a competitive or perfectly competitive industry. Now, profits. So profits for a monopoly are always going to be greater than profits for a competitive industry. Just make sure you have that somewhere. You will be asked questions for that on the final. Okay, so the welfare cost of monopoly. So competitive market industry is where price equals marginal cost. Our total surplus is maximized. So monopoly equilibrium, price is greater than our profit maximizing condition. So the value to buyers of an additional unit exceeds the cost of the resource needed to produce that unit. So the monopoly quantity is too low. If you could increase, is too low, you could increase total surplus with a larger quantity. Now, total surplus in this case is the economic well-being of buyers and sellers in the market. Now, our consumer surplus is their willingness to pay. Producer surplus is their willingness to receive. Now, when we create a monopoly, this is the big reason why we don't like monopolies. They create a deadweight loss. We've talked about deadweight loss in taxation. This is the same thing here with monopolies. No one gets this portion, not the consumer, not the producer, nobody. So we're going to talk the welfare cost of monopoly. So the competitive equilibrium. So if our marginal cost, remember when we talk about competitive equilibrium, so know the distinctions between the two. Marginal cost equals demand. Now our demand in this case is also going to equal our price if it's a competitive market. So this is our quantity produced in the perfectly competitive firm. Total surplus is maximized. So if you do the math for this, if you do the math for up here and here, you would get your total surplus. Now, monopoly equilibrium. Again, we have to have our marginal revenue curve. Now, this intersection right here at marginal revenue and marginal cost, this is where this is how much you're gonna produce. This is the price that you're gonna set right up here. So this is our quantity that we produce, and this corresponds to the price. So again, it shows our price is higher. Our price is greater than our marginal cost. That's always going to be the case. Now this triangle on this left hand or on this right hand side, this is our deadweight loss. This is the negative effect of having a monopoly. So again, just make sure you know that. Okay, we're also going to do some practice problems. I'll have a video of just a couple of practice problems on how to calculate the math. If you need more time with it. The rest of this lecture is just going to be talking about price discrimination. So price discrimination is something that you see on a daily basis. It's basically you sell the same good but at different prices for different buyers. So because of this, a firm can increase profits by charging a higher price to buyers who are willing to pay more. Now, the only way to do this is if you can separate customers according to their willingness to pay. And this can raise economic welfare. So an example of this. So just try to think in your time. So before this quarantine, you'd purchase certain products. There's some things that you're willing to buy, some things you aren't willing to buy. So price discrimination, they charge different prices to different peoples. So for example, when you go, let's say you go to the movie theater and you want to watch a new movie, now this is going to be different per individual, just think through this. Do you go to watch a movie at 10 a.m. on a Wednesday, or do you go on opening night? Now, what's the main differences between matinee prices and evening prices? There's a difference. People who are willing to pay more, they're going to go at night because maybe they like having a packed theater. Maybe they like going on opening night. Now, people who aren't willing to pay as much, they're going to come in the morning. They're going to come in the morning because they don't want to have long lines at the concession stands, for it not to be as busy, and so forth. Another example would be, let's say your favorite restaurant. They have lunch specials and then they have dinner prices or a dinner menu. Is there a difference between those two? There always is going to be, because at lunch they're trying to get more people to come in. Again, they're discriminating. Basically, they're charging a higher price to individuals that come for dinner, even though it's the same product that they sell for lunch. So again, that's just another way they try to increase their profits. Another example would be, let's just say you buy a package or a gym membership. Gym membership meaning there's different tiers of gym memberships where you have access to just one club, or all clubs around the nation, or certain privileges within the gym itself. So for example, if there was like a massage chair or a sauna or other things like that, if you value having a massage chair and having access to all of their facilities, then you're going to pay much more. As opposed to, let's just say you just want to hit the weights, you're going to get the most basic package. So again, anytime you see these packages, this is a form of price discrimination. Another example we'll talk about in a bit is the airline industry. They price discriminate. the theaters. There's all kinds of examples in your everyday life that you have gone through that price discriminate. So perfect price discrimination, this is you charge each customer a different price. So this is their exact willingness to pay. Now this is very, very hard to do. Again, you would need to have perfect information and you need to know what each individual is willing to pay. So in this case, a monopoly firm gets the entire surplus. All of it is profit. There's no deadweight loss. Again, it's not realistic to know every single individual's willingness to pay. So we'll go over an example. So here, the monopolist charges the same price to all of its buyers. So this top portion is consumer surplus. This bottom portion is their profit. This right triangle is their deadweight loss. Now they're charging everyone the same price. Now this isn't as beneficial. If we were doing perfect price discrimination, you would charge each individual the exact price that they are willing to pay. Remember, the demand curve is showing their willingness to pay at each single price. So here, the monopolist produces competitive quantity, but the price that they charge is each buyer's willingness to pay. So here, this is the quantity they're going to produce now. This is perfect price discrimination. So again, we're not talking about competitive. We're just going to produce at their demand curve. So now, this whole portion, the monopolist captures the consumer surplus as profit too. Because again, each individual on this curve is a different point. This point is showing us their willingness to pay. If we charge them each the specific price that they're willing to pay, we capture this whole curve. And there's no deadweight loss. That's perfect price discrimination. Now, as I mentioned, perfect price discrimination is not possible in the real world. No firm knows every buyer's willingness to pay. And buyers do not reveal this to its sellers. Again, they always have withhold information. Now, price discrimination itself, firms divide customers into groups based on some observable traits that is likely related to willingness to pay, such as age. So we'll talk about this in a second. So examples, we have movie tickets. So there's discounts for seniors, students, and people who attend during the weekday afternoons. So again, some people might like going Friday morning at 10. Some people might like going Friday night at 8 p.m. So I've worked at a movie theater. For the most part, people that come in the morning, they're relatively on the older side. People that come in at night are relatively on the younger side. All I know is on opening night, it sucks working. People are crazy. It's a lot of mess. But anyways, so lower willingness to pay than people who pay full price on Friday night. It's basically people who come on the weekdays, afternoons, or in the morning. They're not willing to pay that price for all those other things that are added or included. Now, airline prices, this is another example as well. There's discounts for Saturday night stayovers. So those long flights, they're usually going to be cheaper because it's an 18-hour flight, let's just say 16 or 18-hour flight, but there is, it's just a long travel time and a lot of people don't want to do it. So a personal example, my family lives out in Ohio. I'm currently there right now while I'm making this video, sadly. But basically, the flights here, you can either take an overnight flight, that like a red eye, which is cheap, or there are other flights available that are 12 to 15 hours, even though you can get there 4 hours nonstop. Individuals that want to take the nonstop flights, they're going to be much higher because, again, you value your time. You want to be there faster. You don't want to be hanging out at other airports for 4 to 5 hours doing nothing. So there's a difference between prices. So just think of a time where you purchased a cheaper plane ticket just based on, okay, yes, you get to spend 16 hours in another city, but you just do that because, again, you got to do what you got to do with the money that you have. So those are decisions that I've made and where this shows up. So if you compare business travelers to just casual leisure travelers, business travelers are willing to pay much more because they have somewhere to be. Their job depends on it, compared to somebody who, let's just say, is taking a vacation for a month in a different country. They're going to be much more relaxed. They're going to be looking at the prices much more accordingly. Now, just think about when you've done this. Other examples would be discount coupons. So personally, I never coupon just because I feel like I don't have the patience and I don't really go out of my way to do it, but some people do. So that's basically saying their willingness to um, pay is different than others. So people who have time to clip or organize coupons are more likely to have a lower income or lower willingness to pay than others. So let's just say I'm going to pay full price on a box of cereal. Let's just say it's $4 a box. Now let's say someone who coupons, they're only willing to pay $2.50 and they have a coupon for it. So their willingness to pay is lower than my willingness to pay. I'm willing to pay more because I don't value going out of my way to clip and organize and find all these coupons and so forth. The next one is need-based financial aid. This is another way to price discriminate. So low-income families have lower willingness to pay for their children's education, so they get chosen first for these financial aid. So schools price discriminate by offering need-based aid to low-income families. Basically, the lower your income, the more likely you're going to get financial aid. They have less money or less willing to pay for a higher price for their education. So again, price discrimination. Okay, quantity discounts. Another way to do this is when you buy in bulk. So buyer willingness to pay often declines with additional units. So firms charge less per unit for large quantities and small ones. So the example I always talk about is Costco. When you go to Costco, you buy in bulk, but the way they make up for this or this lower price is their membership. So when you pay a membership, this is a way to counteract and capture more profit. An example we'll talk about here is a movie theater. They charge $4 for a small popcorn or $5 for a large one. That's twice as big. Again, it's $1 difference. They always try to upsell you. Again, I've worked concessions before. It's a personal story. I've worked concessions and I had my manager. They're always just roaming right behind us. And your goal is to always upsell. Even if a customer says no, the rule of thumb is if they say no 3 times, then you don't have to ask them again. But again, just asking somebody multiple times, like, oh, do you want to upgrade your meal or your bundle for 60 extra cents or whatever? The goal is to capture more profit, and also through price discrimination. So you're getting more for less money in their eyes. All right, so public policy towards monopolies. There's the whole goal to break up monopolies is to increase competition. It's not fair if one company has a stronghold on the market. So there's different acts. So the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890, the Clayton Antitrust Act of 1914. All of these were to either prevent mergers, break up companies, and increase competition. So anytime you see any of these, the main thing is to increase competition and decrease monopolies. The reason we don't want monopolies is because they create a deadweight loss. That's bad for society through economics. So we want to break up companies and we want to prevent companies from coordinating their activities to make the market less competitive. The goal is to increase competition so we can increase our total surplus. Also, mergers are allowed if it shows that it benefits society and you're not taking advantage of them. There's a lot of rules and regulations. If you ever take a industrial organization or a law and econ class, they really talk about this. So yeah, if you're interested in that, by all means, let me know. I can send you more resources on that specifically. Okay, so the other thing we can do is regulation. So we can regulate the behavior of monopolists and set the monopolist price. So for natural monopolies, we can come in and say, for a utility company, you can't charge more than this price. So again, it helps the consumer, and it also benefits the producer in a sense because they're still making a profit, not as much as they would like, but there's a cap. So this is common in the case of natural monopolies. When marginal cost is less than average total cost at all quantities, marginal cost pricing would result in losses. So regulatory might subsidize the monopolist or set a price where it's equal to average total cost for zero economic profit. Now, they would still get subsidies from the government, so they would still incur some form of profit. Another example is public ownership. So how the ownership of a firm affects the cost of production. So private owners, their incentive is to minimize their cost and maximize their profit. If it's publicly owned or the government owns it, If it does a bad job, it loses. The losers are the customers and the taxpayers. So if it's owned publicly, we fund it as taxpayers. If they're not doing a ideal job or whatever they're trying to carry out, basically the customers, so us, we get screwed over. So an example of this would be the U.S. Postal Service. It's run by the government. Again, if you ask anyone, they've almost always had problems with the U.S. Postal Service. Again, it's publicly owned. It's not the most efficient. They're always losing stuff. It's not as good as FedEx and other private industries. So public ownership is usually less efficient since no profit motive is to minimize costs. So again, there's less incentive. They also have unions. So we could talk about the Postal Service for hours and hours, but we're not going to. Okay, the last policy is do nothing. So some economists argue that it's often best for the government not to try to remedy the inefficiency of monopoly pricing. So determining the proper role of the government in the economy requires judgments about politics as well as economics. So in some cases there is no policy. Some economists they have a much more classical approach, hands off, let the market figure itself out. So an argument for this, or for doing nothing, is if a monopoly charges too much of a price, no one's going to purchase their product. So they have to set a price where they make a profit as well, and it has to be in the best interest of the consumer. It's the one thing to own all the key resources and have a patent or whatever, but if no one's purchasing your product, or if the price is too high, people aren't going to purchase, you're not going to make any money. Now, people who are against this is the deadweight loss argument. Basically, with a deadweight loss, you have inefficiencies. That's not something that you want. All right, so pure monopolies are rare in the real world. Many firms have market power due to selling a unique variety of products. So if you can differentiate your product, you can charge a higher price. You can have market power. And also having a large market share and few significant competitors. So for example, when you look at the cellular service companies, so AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, they act very similar to monopolies, but there's still competition available there. So we'll talk about those in next week's lecture. In many cases, most of the results from this chapter apply, including markup over price over marginal cost. So again, when we talk about this other example, when there's a few powerful firms in a market, so they have market power, this is an oligopoly. It's still closer. If you look at a spectrum, on the far right, you have monopolies. On the far left, you have perfect competition. If you split the difference and you're closer to the monopoly side, you'll have an oligopoly. That's something we have much more common today, and it's prevalent. There's no case of a pure monopoly. Now with this, they still mark up the price, and there's still a deadweight loss. Okay, so that's going to be the end of this lecture. The last couple of slides are just a review. If you guys have questions, by all means, drop a comment below. I'm going to post another practice problem video where we're going to walk through a couple examples to calculate total revenue, total cost, profits, how much you should produce, and so forth. Again, if you have questions, drop a comment, email me, attend the Zoom session. We have a couple weeks left. I hope you guys are staying healthy. Other than that, I will see you guys next time. Thank you.